Today we're going to be getting through the theories of economic development. There's several models that we need to look at today, so strap on, we've got to get through them all. First one I want to look at is what's known as the Modernization Model or the Westernization Model. Britain was the first country to develop industry with the Industrial Revolution, which we'll get to later. Great Britain was the first country to do so. The Industrial Revolution occurred because of prosperity, trade, inventions, and natural resources. All of this was found in Western Europe and especially in Great Britain, and that's why industry first developed there. Wealth during this time period of the modernization model was regarded as a personal virtue, and the growing importance of individualism steadily replaced kinship and community. In other words, there was this strong motivation to improve yourself, and with that, industrialization took off because people were willing to go above and beyond. Basically, the modernization model says that any country that wants its economy to grow should study the paths taken by industrialized nations and logically so that they can also reap the benefits of modernization. In other words, they should look at how Great Britain did it. One of the best examples of modernization theory is Rostow's modernization theory and his stages of economic development. In this modernization theory is concerned with economic development of your country. And there's different stages. The stages here are going to be a little bit, that you see on the picture is a little bit different than what we're going to talk about because this visual is not necessarily AP Human Geography correlated, but it fits. According to this model, the first stage is the traditional society. It's the subsistent society when you barter. This is the Neolithic Revolution time when you're bartering for your food. That's where you're focused on agriculture. It's where people build their lives around families, communities, religious beliefs. Lives are very similar to the ancestors, and generally there's limited wealth in this time period. Most countries in the world were in this initial stage. Now the next one, this is the one that's added from this model, is the transitional stage. What this visual is showing you in regards to the transitional stage is it's the stage between traditional and takeoff. This is when you start specializing, this is when you start building your own infrastructure and you start growing and producing a surplus. And then the next stage, according to this one, it's stage 3, is the takeoff stage. In this stage, people start to experiment with producing goods, not just for their own consumption, but also to trade with others for profit. And this takes place during the Industrial Revolution. During this time period, urbanization increases and technological production and breakthroughs also occur. There's greater individualism, there's more of a willingness to take risk, and there's desires for material goods and consumer goods. Often, these material goods and this drive for individualism takes the expense, it's at the expense of family ties and traditional customs. So you start backing away from the community kinship type of idea, and it's more of a focus on individualism. That's what starts taking countries off. It's taking them off. Next stage is the drive to technological maturity. Economic growth is widely accepted during this time, and people focus on attaining higher standards of living and not so much focus on the family and kinship and community. The economy diversifies as people become more prosperous and can afford more luxuries. Poverty is greatly reduced and more material goods are produced. Cities grow as more people leave farms, and modernization is evident in the core areas of the country, in those major city centers. Population growth is reduced during this time period as children require more years of schooling in order to survive in the increasingly complex society, and children also become more expensive to raise. Additionally, international trade expands during this drive to technological maturity stage. And you can see the keywords there in this model: diversification, innovation, less reliance on imports, more of a focus on exports, so you're making money, and also in investments. And then you move on to the last stage. the high mass consumption stage. Economic development steadily raises the living standards as mass production encourages consumption of industrial products. Luxuries in previous stages now become necessities as the society is structured on the expanding array of goods produced. You're marked by high incomes, with the majority of workers in the service sector of the economy, not in that primary and secondary stage. One thing to note, and it's important to know, that all countries will eventually pass through all 5 stages. It's just a look at when they get there. Some of the criticisms of the modernization theory. Socialist countries say that the modernization theory is just a justification for capitalist countries to continue to exploit non-capitalist countries. Another criticism is that modernization simply hasn't occurred in many poor countries. A third criticism is that the modernization theory fails to recognize that rich nations, which benefit from the status quo, often block the paths of development for LDCs, less developed countries. And then number 4, the last criticism of the modernization theory, is that it suggests that the cause of poverty lie in the poor societies themselves and not on the availability of progress. And now moving on to the dependency theory. The dependency theory puts the primary responsibility for global poverty on the rich nations. It holds that economic development of many countries is blocked by the fact that industrialized nations exploit them. Some countries allow a large number of citizens to live in poverty in order to allow an elite class to control all of the economic resources. This is an outgrowth of Marxism, the dependency theory is, which emphasizes the exploitation of one social class by the other. In reaction to this theory, many LDCs, less developed countries, have experimented with forms of socialism with the intent of nationalizing industry and narrowing the gap between the rich and the poor. Now, the visuals you see here are from Wallerstein's capitalist world economy theory. Emanuel Wallerstein was first explained economic development in 1974 using a model of the capitalist world economy, which is a global economic system that is based in high-income nations with market economies. Wallerstein traced inequalities back to the British colonization efforts during the colonial era, and he divided today's countries into 3 different types, which is what you see here. One is the core countries. These are the rich nations that fuel the world's economy by taking raw materials from around the world and channeling the wealth to the more developed nations. It's nations in North America, Western Europe, Australia, and Japan through multinational corporations. Then the second aspect of his model was the countries of the periphery. These are the low-income countries that were drawn into the world economy by colonial exploitation, and they continue to support rich ones today by providing inexpensive labor and a large market for industrial products. So basically, they're fueling the richness, if that's a word, of the core countries by providing them with inexpensive labor as well as raw materials maybe. And then third aspect of this is countries of the semi-periphery. The remaining countries of the world are somewhat in between the periphery and the core. They exert more power than the peripheral countries, but they're still dominated to some degree by the core countries. According to Wallerstein, the world economy benefits rich societies and harms other countries by making them dependent on the core countries. They're caught in a cycle of selling inexpensive raw materials and buying expensive manufactured goods, forever spending more money than they take in, basically saying that you're not going to be able to get out of a periphery or semi-periphery, you're stuck there. One thing to note is that core countries had an advantage in the 15th and the 16th centuries in commerce, because they subjugated and colonized the peripheral and semi-peripheral countries and controlled them all the way from the beginning during the 15th and 16th centuries because of colonization. The dependency theory emphasizes the idea that no country develops in isolation because the global economy shapes the destiny of all nations. Some criticisms of the Wallerstein's theory. 1 says that it wrongly treats wealth as a zero-sum commodity, as if no one gets richer without someone else getting poorer. Wealth is created through ambition and hard work. Number 2, it places too much blame on rich countries that have a long history of supporting less developed countries, such as India, South Korea, and Japan. And number 3, they ignore cultural factors in LDCs that discourage economic growth, hence the traditional culture. It's just totally ignored. And now looking at the self-sufficiency model. Man, that's a good graphic, isn't it? The self-sufficiency model it encourages LDCs to isolate fledgling businesses from competition of large international corporations. LDCs can only escape global inequalities by shielding local businesses from internal trade in the international market and encouraging internal growth. In other words, it's encouraging growing yourselves by blocking some of these rich nations. In this type of model, there's high tariffs, limit on imported goods. It requires international companies to purchase very expensive licenses in hopes of discouraging them from trading in the country. Many Indian countries grew under this model. One problem that emerged was inefficiency. Without government subsidies and import protection, they didn't try to improve the quality of their goods. They didn't try to create lower production costs, and they didn't try to reduce their prices because they were protected from these tariffs. So really the competition was taken out. So their products remained inferior to the international products and oftentimes comparable in price. And lastly, the 4 Asian tigers. The 4 Asian tigers is referring to Hong Kong, South Korea, Taiwan, and Singapore. These 4 Asian tigers adopted the international trade alternative, which was their economies boomed in the 1960s. They were focusing on what was known as export-oriented industrialization. This was a strategy that seeks to directly integrate the country's economy into the global economy by concentrating on economic production that can find a place in international markets. For example, these Asian countries have prospered with this strategy from their use of automobile industry as well as the electronic industry because they focused on these exports that they then traded with the United States, and it allowed their economies to boom.